Hello, ladies and gentlemen, and welcome to your first Cornell Notes assignment of English 12B. I know you missed them. I know you thought you were done with them, but one more semester of Cornell Notes, you made it this far, and you're going to do great. So, as we're picking up where we left off in the Renaissance for Unit 1 in terms of the Renaissance era and the voices of the Renaissance, but we're really focusing in this unit more or less on the poetic side of it and more on the humanistic side. So this is going to be about humanism and its role in the Renaissance. As we get underway, let's pick up our story where we left off, with the rise of the Stuarts. With Elizabeth's death in 1603, the powerful Tudor dynasty came to an end. Elizabeth was succeeded by her cousin James VI of Scotland, son of Mary Stuart, who ruled as James I of England. James supported the Church of England, thus angering both Roman Catholic and Protestant extremists. Early in his reign, a Catholic group included Guy Fawkes plotted to kill him and blow up Parliament in the unsuccessful gunpowder plot of 1605. James and his son Charles both aroused opposition in the Puritan-dominated House of Commons with their extravagance, contempt for Parliament, and preference for the Catholic-style high church rituals in the Anglican Church. Clashes with the Puritans only worsened when Charles I took the throne in 1625. In 1629, Charles I dismissed Parliament, and he did not summon it again for 11 years. During this time, he took strong measures against his opponents. Thousands of English citizens, especially Puritans, immigrated to North America to escape persecution. So if you remember from last year in American Lit, this is the reason why Puritans came over and why they were so staunch and they were so controlling in their beliefs, because they had that opportunity. Then, in 1637, Charles's attempt to introduce Anglican practices in Scotland's Presbyterian churches led to a rebellion there. In need of funds to suppress the Scots, Charles in 1640 was forced to reconvene Parliament, which promptly stripped many of his powers. He responded with a show of military force, and England was soon plunged into a civil war. The English Civil War pitted the royalists, mainly Catholics, Anglicans, and the nobility, against supporters of Parliament, Puritans, smaller landowners, and the middle class. Under the leadership of General Oliver Cromwell, the devout, disciplined Puritan army soundly defeated the royalists in 1645, and the king surrendered a year later. At first, Parliament established a commonwealth. With Cromwell as a head, they made him Lord Protector for life. The Puritan-dominated government proved no less autocratic than the Stuart reign, however. England's theaters were closed, and they closed, with most forms of recreation being suspended. Sunday became a day of prayer, with even walking for pleasure being forbidden. When Cromwell died in 1658, his son inherited the title, but not his ability to handle with the wrangling among political factions and an increasingly unruly public. In 1660, a new parliament invited Charles II, son of Charles I, to return from exile and assume the throne. His reign ushered in a new chapter in English history, the Restoration. So that's kind of where our historical standpoints lie. In terms of cultural influences, the Renaissance for writers, artists, scientists, scholars, in fact for anyone gripped by curiosity and the urge to create, the Renaissance was an amazing time to be alive. The Renaissance, which literally means rebirth or revival, was marked by a surge in creativity and the emergence of a world view more modern than medieval. It began in Italy in the 14th century and rapidly spread north throughout Europe. In England, political instability delayed the advent of Renaissance ideas, but they began to take hold after 1485 when Henry VII took the throne and reached full flower during the reign of Elizabeth I. All through the Middle Ages, Europeans had focused their energy on religion and the afterlife, viewing this world primarily as a preparation for the world to come. During the time of the Renaissance, people became much more interested in and curious about life on Earth. A new emphasis was placed on the individual and on the development of human potential, and the ideal Renaissance man was not a bold and dashing knight or a scholarly monk, but a well-rounded person who cultivated his talents to the fullest. Renaissance Europeans delighted in the arts and literature, the beauty of nature, human impulses, exploration, and a new sense of mastery over the world. This was the time of Shakespeare, Galileo, and Columbus, after all. Inventions and discoveries made possible things that had been previously unimaginable. The compass, for example, along with the advances in astronomy, allowed ships to venture into uncharted seas, and subsequent exploration profoundly altered narrow medieval perceptions of the world. Gutenberg's printing press expanded horizons of a different sort, meant that books no longer had to be copied out by hand. Once the rare and precious treasures of a privileged few, books were now widely available. In turn, by 1530, more than half of England's population could read. The Renaissance flourished in Elizabethan times when theater and literature reached new heights. Even Elizabeth's successor, James I, contributed to the period's literacy and literary legacy with his commissioning of a new translation of the Bible. With the reign of Puritans, Oliver Cromwell, and his closing of theaters, however, the period was near its end. The restoration of the monarchy in 1660 marked the official conclusion of the Renaissance period in history. During the Renaissance, literature reflected another important influence, and that was humanism. At this time, the universities of Europe buzzed with new ideas about the worth and importance of the individual, and about the spiritual value of beauty in nature and art, about the power of human reason to decide what was good and right. Those who taught these new ideas were called humanists because they studied the humanities, art, history, philosophy, and literature. In other words, subjects that were human rather than sacred, and looked to the classics for wisdom and guidance. Humanists were often devout Christians. One, in fact, became Pope Pius II, and they tried to reconcile the new ideas with their religious beliefs. In Northern Europe, Christian humanists led by the Dutch monk Erasmus studied ancient Greek and Hebrew so they could read not only the classics but also the Bible and other sacred writings in the original. Naturally, reading the words of history's greatest thinkers gave Erasmus and his followers high ideals, and they sharply criticized European society, and especially the church, for falling short. Erasmus traveled widely throughout Europe, writing and teaching, and made many friends, among them the artist Hans Holbein, the younger and English writer and scholar Sir Thomas More. Like Erasmus, More saw much to criticize in the way the world was being run, and believed humans could do better. In 1516, he published his book called Utopia, from the Greek for no place, about a perfect society on an imaginary island. In Utopia, there was no poverty or greed, not even private property. Everything was shared, and everyone was equal. War and competition were unknown, and the people were governed by reason. Humanists were concerned with classical learning. One of their aims was to educate the sons of nobility to speak and write in Latin, the language of diplomacy and all higher learning. For humanist writers, however, reverence for the classics created a conflict. Should they write their own works in Latin or in English? Although many wrote in the classical Latin, others urged scholars to improve English by writing ambitious works in it. In any case, the humanists' reverence for classics combined with a pride in the English language led to many distinguished translations throughout the period, including the Earl of Surrey's translation of Virgil's Aeneid and George Chapman's translation of Homer's Iliad and Odyssey. Interestingly, the humanists reflected a fact of life during the Renaissance period. Religion was a subject dear to most, but agreed upon by few. From the outset, humanism was more concerned with Christianity, but while early humanists, such as Sir Thomas More, a Catholic, primarily attacked Luther and the Protestants, later humanists, such as Roger Ascham, were earnest Protestants who attacked a more secular humanism coming out of Italy. These men went on to influence later Christian writers such as the great John Milton. Despite the religious turmoil that marked this period in English history, England remained a Christian nation, and its literature reflects the beliefs of its people. Spiritual and devotional writings became some of the more popular and the most popular and influential works of the day. In fact, the King James Bible likely did more to mold English prose style than any other work. For centuries, the Church had resisted calls to translate the Latin Bible into languages that common people could understand, on the grounds that it would diminish Church authority and lead to heresy. In fact, when the first English version of the Bible was translated by the 14th century scholar John Wycliffe, he was attacked by a British archbishop as that wretched and pestilent fellow who crowned his wickedness by translating the scriptures into the mother tongue. Another English translator, William Tyndale, fled to the continent during the early years of Henry VIII's reign, only to be condemned as a heretic and burned at the stake. Ironically, in the meantime, Henry had broken with Rome, and in the following years, English translations of the Bible proliferated. Finally, in 1604, James I commissioned 54 leading biblical scholars to create a new authorized version, one based on the original Hebrew and Greek, as well as on earlier translations from the Latin. Masterpieces of literature are not generally created by committee, but the King James Bible, compiled and completed in 1611, proved to be an exception. Its beautiful imagery, graceful simplicity, and measured cadence has made it the principal Protestant Bible in England for more than 300 years, and it still remains the most important and influential of all of the English translations. One of the earliest writers to be influenced by the King James Bible was the Puritan poet John Milton. In fact, he had been said that he knew the Bible by heart. His epic blank verse poem, Paradise Lost, is based on the biblical story of the first humans. Adam and Eve, who are tempted by Satan to eat the forbidden fruit of the tree of knowledge. They eat and then are punished by being driven from the Garden of Eden out into the world, where they and all their descendants must suffer and die. A devout believer, Milton filled his work with energy and power, and none of the many rebel characters in literature since can equal his portrayal of Satan, the fallen angel. Dignified and elevated, even biblical, Milton's language is meant to evoke reverence for his religious themes. His rich and complex style, married with his devotion to religious themes, places Milton and the other Renaissance Christian humanists, but his talents set him apart as an artist. Milton was a typical Renaissance man, a scholar who read widely, studied the classics as well as the Bible, and who was fluent in many languages. Fellow Puritan writer John Bunyan, on the other hand, was an uneducated tinker and preacher who spent many years in jail for his religious beliefs. While in jail, Bunyan wrote his greatest work, The Pilgrim's Progress, an allegory in which a character named Christian undertakes a dangerous journey from this world to the next. Along the way, he encounters such obstacles as the Slough of Despond and meets characters with such names as Mr. Moneylove and Ignorance. Bunyan modeled his style on that of the English Bible, and he uses concrete language and details familiar to most readers, enabling even the most basic of readers to share in Christian's experiences. Though the Pilgrim's Progress lacks the grandeur and complexity of Paradise Lost, its deeply felt simplicity made it one of the most widely read books in the English language. In the early 17th century, two groups of poets emerged. The first was inspired by the literary man of all trades, Ben Jonson. Like Shakespeare, his friend and rival, Jonson was not just a playwright, but also an accomplished poet. Dissatisfied with the extravagant romance of Elizabethan lyrics, Jonson chose instead to imitate the graceful craftsmanship of classical forms. Far from the typical image of a refined poet, however, Jonson was a great bellowing bear of a man who loved an argument and didn't mind if it turned into a brawl, and his forceful personality won him many admirers, as his considerable talent did. Johnson's followers, called Sons of Ben, were sophisticated young aristocrats, among them Robert Herrick, Richard Lovelace, and Sir John Suckling. These poets were known as the Cavaliers because many of them took the sides of Charles I in the civil war between Cromwell's Roundheads, so called for their closely cropped hair, and the long-haired royalist Cavaliers. Light-hearted, charming, witty, and sometimes cynical, Cavalier poetry dealt mainly with themes of love, war, chivalry, and loyalty to the throne, and frequently advocated the philosophy of carpe diem, or living for the moment. Johnson's contemporary John Donne is representative of a second group of poets, the metaphysical poets. These writers broke with convention, employing unusual imagery, elaborate metaphors, and irregular meter to produce intense poems characterized by themes of death, physical love, and religious devotion. As you see, folks, a lot of stuff here that we'll be delving into. Have a good day.